Folks, happy Friday and welcome to the Freedom from the Press podcast. My name is Jason Robertson and I'm here with my partner in crime.
Merry Christmas, Todd Peterson. It's beginning to look a lot like I told you so. Happy Merry Christmas before the holiday season officially kicks off. This is our last podcast maybe of 2023.
Could be. We might sneak one in next Friday. Todd, and I love the fact that you say Merry Christmas. I don't know about you, but I'm not a happy holidays guy. Are you?
This is the Christmas season. You listen to Christmas music. You celebrate Christmas. You put up a Christmas tree. It is all things Christmas here in this household. Merry Christmas, folks. Good to have you with us today.
Yeah, and I got to say, too, if somebody wishes me a happy Hanukkah back, I am unoffended. I don't know about you.
No, whatever you wish me, if you are Muslim or Jewish and you greet me or celebrate your traditions in front of me, I'll say it right back to you. I'm happy to have you on board here. But if I wish you Merry Christmas, don't get offended.
Right. And, I bring that up because today we're going to talk about how the left is really destroying our history, our values, and they're just trying to slowly erode America. And the first trip on our journey is we're going to talk about the Minnesota state flag. Now, a lot of you guys are probably sitting there going, why the hell are these two guys talking about the Minnesota state flag? Because Minnesota's been a state for how many years? They've had a flag for how many years? And I got to say, up until the last couple of weeks, I didn't even know they were redesigning the state flag. And Todd, when news of this came out, were you like, what in the holy hell is going on?
Two immediate reactions, Jason. Number one, with you, I had no idea. And folks, look, we are in Minnesota, so we have a lot of backstories that we're going to cover today. Both of us live in the state, had no idea this was happening. This had not been widely reported, even in local news. And then my second immediate response was, of course they are. And so those of us that aren't aware, Minnesota in midterm elections somehow got the trifecta for Dems. So Democrats control the House, Senate, and Governor's Mansion, and they have had a field day this last legislative session, just doing everything woke possible and just ruining the state even more than they have already here. So that's where we're at. We got a new flag, a new state emblem, and we're going to dive into that today and talk about the larger issue of how they're erasing our history, our culture, and everything they can all at once.
Yeah, so it's funny too when Todd says how Minnesota got taken over. So the Senate, literally, they won the Minnesota State Senate by like one person.
One seat.
And so you got one seat in the Senate, you got the House and the Governor's Mansion, and all of a sudden you go crazy. So if you look over here next to me, we have the old Minnesota state emblem.
Always the flag in my heart, Jason.
What's that?
Always the flag in this household.
Always that flag. Yeah, it's crazy. Todd, do you want to take us through kind of a description of the seal, kind of what it stands for?
Absolutely.
That sort of
And folks, if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or Rumble, go ahead and share this video. You can watch as we go along here. And if you're on audio here, I'm going to explain what we're looking at live on the screen here. So this is the old state emblem. And so Minnesota, like a lot of states in the mid-19th century, they adopted flags that kind of had that blue background with the state emblem in the middle. So nothing super fancy to look at. You're not going to win any art awards or anything like that, but it tells a great story. It has a really detailed history in just one small picture here. So as you're looking at some of these images here, you've got yellow dots around there. That represents all the counties in Minnesota. You've got some of the iconic natural beauty elements of the state, for lack of a better word. You got some of the state flower. You've got a picture of, and this is really where it grinds people's gears on the left here. You got a picture of a white farmer. So there's the white settler with Jason. I think that's Minnehaha Falls in the background, or it's supposed to be. And then running away from his farm is the horseback Indian. Jason, we can't have any depiction of Indians in 2023.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So, and if you look at the emblem, I don't see the horse. I mean, I guess any art, it's what you see when you look at it. People see different things. There is a Native American, which, by the way, I'm a Native American. So anybody that says reparations, get off my land. And he's riding his horse and he's waving at the farmer. And I'm assuming that's some sort of kinship. And it's funny because over the last few years, we've learned Aunt Jemima's racist. So you can't have Aunt Jemima on a syrup bottle. We've learned Land O'Lakes butter can't have the Indian on the butter. Although it's funny, I tweeted about this the other day. They replaced Aunt Jemima at my local grocery store with Ghetto Gastro is the brand at Target. So you can have ghetto gastro, but not Aunt Jemima. But anyways, I look at this artwork and I say, this is kind of a nice little evergreen, kind of timeless imagery showing, Native Americans and white settlers living in some sort of peace and harmony.
And Jason, I'm just going to add here, this is just a snapshot of history. Make of it what you will. Maybe you are offended. Maybe having the Indian wave goodbye is symbolic of the white man replacing him. It's not the first time in human history there's been conquest of one group over another, but take it for what it is. This is a snapshot in time. It's telling a story of Minnesota. We are all in Minnesota. This is our history. Like it or not, we can't go back in time and change it. But that's not good enough for the woke left, is it?
I was going to say, so after we've had this flag for how many years, all of a sudden somebody got offended. And Todd, what offended them?
Well, it's that horsebacked American Indian riding over there. And Jason, if we have time, we can get into the American Indian lobby is particularly powerful in Minnesota here. And so as we dive into the who's who behind this movement, you're going to find a lot of voices that identify with local tribes, and more power to you if you have a history or culture that you celebrate. But it seems a little insidious too at the same time, because it's not about promoting Minnesota or America. It's about promoting your identity first over everyone else. And it's the exact opposite of what this nation needs about coming together. Very divisive here. So fast forward, we're going to remove that picture here, Jason, but you mentioned Land O'Lakes. I think this is a little bit humorous to pop up as well. I shared a tweet as well with this. And the joke goes, of course, that they removed the Indian and kept the land here. So Land O'Lakes butter here. They didn't want to offend anyone with the Indian here, but look at their new logo. The only thing that changes, they're missing the person there.
So we stole Land O'Lakes butter from the Indians, and somehow people are celebrating that as a victory.
Somehow that's a victory. And so, Jason, same thing here. If you had to make a prediction, if you didn't know about this and they said, well, we're going to get rid of the offensive artwork, what are they going to do instead here? I don't know if this is a victory of any sort, but here we go. Let's get to the controversy a little bit here.
Yeah.
This is the new state flag. They got rid of the Indian again. I don't know what they added of value, though.
I was going to say this is the worst waste of taxpayer money I've seen. I mean, they're saying the dark blue thing is supposed to represent kind of the shape of Minnesota. To me, every time I see it, I see the Kmart K. So I don't understand. The light blue makes no sense. And I don't even understand the star they went with. Like, why do we have an 8-pointed star?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's an 8-pointed star, the octagram, located in the state capitol, Rotunda. Not verified because I don't really need to go to St. Paul, Minnesota anytime soon, but that's my understanding, at least what I read online. And people make the point of sky. Minnesota means land of sky blue waters, or land reflected in the clouds. So you could have maybe the sky and the water. The best comment I like, though, is from a comment online that said Democrats run Minnesota. So, of course, they picked blue. And I can get on board with that. That's as good as anything. But, Jason, this flag is not necessarily why we're super outraged. Yes, right. It is a waste of time. Tim Walz, his Senate friends, his House friends, they've run up the budget. They are spending all sorts of money on goodies for everybody else except taxpayers. And we don't have time to get into all his legislative idiocies here. But here is what really gets people going here, because that was not the flag that they rolled out just last week. Last Friday, the story broke, and it wasn't the all blue flag that they told us Minnesota had adopted here. Check out this tweet from End Wokeness here. And I'm just going to read it. Make of it what you will. Maybe you agree, maybe you don't. Minnesota is home to the largest Somali population in the West. Representative Ilhan Omar is from Puntland, Somalia. Minnesota just unveiled their new flag. I'm sure this is just a coincidence. And below that, you can see how the old flag, offensive to very few, indifferent, really. I was indifferent to the flag the rest of the time. I mean, it was our state flag. I was good with that. But look at the new flag, Jason, that they had promised last week. And if you're listening on the line here, green bar in the bottom. It's a tricolor. Green bar in the bottom, white bar in the middle, light blue bar on the top. And Jason, right next to that, do you believe in coincidences? The flag of the state where Ilhan Omar is from in Somalia, green bar in the bottom, white bar in the middle, blue bar on the top. And guess what else they have in common? A single white star.
Right. So the folks dropped this out. Most people, even Minnesotans, didn't know they were working on redesigning the flag. It was a whole thing, and we've got to get into kind of who pushed it and how it got there and that sort of thing.
Boy, we can go really deep on this, and we will today.
Oh yeah, but we land on a reasonable facsimile of the Somali flag. And I got to say, for those who aren't familiar in Minnesota, there have been a couple large migration events. In the 80s, when I was young, a lot of Hmong population was moved into the Rochester, Minnesota area where the Mayo Clinic's located. And it was thousands of people were resettled there. And you ended up with just straight up Hmong communities. These are people fleeing really bad situations. And to be honest, they didn't really seek necessarily to assimilate all that much. They had kind of their own traditions and cultures. And then in the Obama era, suddenly we had a bunch of Somalis resettle. And for those who don't know what's going on in Somalia, it's a war-torn country without much, like, there isn't much of a government. You go through these cycles where it's a different warlord takes over. It's really horrible. And so those people, if you get into immigration, those people were probably resettled for not just economic reasons, but for safety, security, that kind of stuff. But they've taken over miles worth of acreage in Minneapolis. They actually call some parts of town Little Somalia because it's, if you drive through there, it's not like Little Italy. You as a normal person aren't welcome, or as a traditional cis white male, you aren't welcome in there. I mean, you stop, you go to the gas station, you go to the grocery store, you are in Little Somalia, and they're not afraid to let you know. So for those of us who tend to be a little more conspiratorial, we happen to see a pretty direct connection between the state of, or the Somali flag, and the new flag.
And Jason, just to add on to that too, if you are in Minnesota, you never voted on this. And so a lot of traditionally older white rural communities are also now getting replaced. So St. Cloud, Minnesota is a larger community. New Ulm is a smaller rural community. But a lot of these small towns suddenly had an influx of Somali refugees placed there. They never got to decide on that. They never really had a choice. And now suddenly they're being called racist if they don't want everything about their community fabric ripped apart. And look, you and I are humanitarians. We don't want to see anybody hurt, mutilated, what have you in these situations here. But again, worth asking, why is it that halfway around the world, these people are getting flown, dropped into communities that did not want them? All fair questions worth asking. And how are we supposed to just bend over and accept everything without having some sort of say and just desire to say, look, if you're going to be here, that's fine. But this is what we're about. We're not about what you're about. We're about what we're about.
Right. Yeah. You don't show up at somebody's country or somebody's house and say, we're going to go fundamentally change what you're doing in your place to make it like the place we left because it was a shithole. That's just ridiculous. Even ethnic groups that have immigrated into America, they wanted to understand what made America great, what made America special, and why you wanted to be a part of that. And I'll be honest, this flag, if you take that old logo, a very traditional, very timeless, it gives you a sense that you're part of something bigger and you're part of history. You look at the new flag that they threw out, even the final one they landed on, and it's just it separates people from any sort of connection to the history or what's been, which is kind of the topic of what we're going to talk about today. So,
Yeah,
Todd, who was behind all this nonsense?
Absolutely. But let me get to your point, because I think that's important one. Jason, a child could have drawn this flag. This represents nothing. It means nothing. I think, and that's the point, though. They don't want you to have a connection, emotional, historical, cultural, any sort of connection with that. And I do want to go one step further because, Jason, I'm not going to take out my tinfoil hat. Here's the connection that people made online for a little bit. And they said, well, that's pretty similar. But it goes so much deeper than that. So here's one of my tweets that I shared. Jason, here's what stands out to me. I see white, blue, and green, and a single white star in all of these flags. And these are all different flags of different either regions, states, or government offices of Somalia. So Jubaland, that is a popular one that called up. The upper one in the right there, that's actually the Air Force one. But again, the point being made is that they are all the same color. They have basically the same pattern there. Even on 4 out of the 5 that I got up there, they have that triangle. And Minnesota is the opposite because they want to tell us it's the state of Minnesota in an abstract shape. But, conspiratorially as well, opposite, maybe we're on the other side of the world, so you got to flip the shape around. Like, you can go into a lot of different directions if you want to about how weird it is that our flag seemed to represent a lot of Somalia here. And so I'm throwing you off guard with this too, Jason. I want to go a little bit deeper because this is kind of fascinating too. Here is the young man that submitted originally the flag. We're going to go on a bit of a tangent here. So, young man in rural Minnesota, he submits his original design here, and this is what was chosen. It was F1953. If you want to go check this out, you can go to the State Redesign Commission. They did the state and the emblem this past year here. So this is the winning design that they chose. You can see a lot of similarities. The only thing that's different is the shape of the star, although it's still 8-sided or 8-pointed. And then the tricolor pattern is moved around a little bit, but this is what the commission said we like. Here's a fun deep dive on him that End Wokeness pulled up here, so I thought I would just share this. Look at the background of our winning artist here. I'm just going to let people look at this. I'm going to share this without comment. But you tell me what side he's coming from here. Do you think he is pro-Somali immigration or anti-Somali immigration? And just let that kind of factor into your decision here as we're talking about erasing Minnesota's flag here momentarily.
Can I just say, anybody that thinks it's a good idea to put a mask on a snowman, I have no words for you. You wear your mask when you're driving by yourself to the grocery store. Like, I have no words. No words. I got to say, too, the chat is particularly on fire today. Ann Smith, she needs to go back to Somalia. State needs to be cleaned up. Who cares about those racists? Country needs our country back, not other countries fed up. And we're fed up, too. And you know what? There should be a bunch more Americans that are fed up with this nonsense. And that's why one ask we have of this show is make sure you give it a like, a comment, and a share. Especially share it and share it with somebody you might not politically agree with. Because there are people, this country is being destroyed, not just by the Democrats, but also by the corrupt Republicans who are letting it happen. And if normal citizens don't find a way to stand up and fight back, we're going to lose this country. And that's why it's important. People don't even know this happened. I guarantee you there's going to be somebody in a town of Minnesota who's going to walk in down in Waseca, and they're going to walk into the city office, and they're going to see that goofy looking flag, and they're going to go, what the hell's that? And it might have been a Joe Biden voter. And they're going to go, oh, that's a new state flag. And what happened to the old state flag? Well, they didn't like it because of the Indian. What's wrong with the Indian? Like, you want the Indian off the flag? Isn't that racist? And he's not even going to know it happened. And that's why we do what we do, is because we need to share this information, A, so we don't go nuts, and B, so that like-minded people who want to stand up for this can say, this is crap. We need to get America back.
Absolutely, Jason. And I want to hammer this point home. That flag was chosen, and I want to show a timeline here. So we ended up with the blue, that boring 2 blue color flag here, and they say that's what we meant all along here. False. So here's what this designer said in creating the flag with the 3 colors specifically, and this is what the panel chose originally here, and I'm going to pop up some timelines in a second. The 3 colors on the right signify important aspects of Minnesota history and culture. The white symbolizes snow. The green stripe represents the beauty of our nature and also the role of agriculture. And the light blue represents the significance of water to our state and the 10,000 lakes. Let's get back up to this image that the young man presented here. That's what he was going for, and that's what the commission resonated with. They said, okay, we have all those elements in Minnesota. That's what we want. And Jason, take a look at this timeline here. So on December 12th, the State Emblems Redesign Commission selected the following submissions as the basis of the next state flag. Do you see the final product on that list of top 3s?
Negatory, Ghost Rider.
Negatory. Let me pop up another one. Well, there's the designer statement here.
We don't need to read that, probably.
Yeah, we probably don't need to read that. In any event here, this is the flag that they presented. This is the flag that then got rolled out, and they said, here's the new flag. But wait a second. Then the commission said a week later that, nope, just kidding, folks. This is the flag that we rolled out here. That's not at all what they said. And Jason, we're missing a slide in here, but on December 15th, they actually selected, I'm going to pop this one back up, the new flag. That's actually what the state of Minnesota presented as the final product on December 15th. That's why these tweets are dated as such now. You can see them coming out. And there was a huge backlash. And so, oh, magically, what do you know? That's when the state decided to say, just kidding, we're going to go with this boring blue flag. And End Wokeness wrote, the Emblem Commission has made last-minute changes to the new state flag in Minnesota. This comes following intense backlash against the original redesign. Yep, there was a large backlash to the original design.
Yeah, it turns out people in Minnesota don't like to have a Somali flag being the flag representing them. Hey Todd, while we're at it too, do you have the new state emblem?
Oh, so let's I don't have that up here. Let's do this for a second. Here's the old emblem. Let me see if I can pull up our new one as well.
Okay, for those who are watching online, Todd's going to grab the new state emblem, which ironically isn't on the flag, which you'd think state emblem would be on the flag. But once we get it pulled up, I want you guys in the chat to let me know when you see it. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Because Todd and I might be crazy, but we both landed on the same scenario when we saw it.
Yeah, without talking to each other, that was both our immediate responses here. So here we go, folks. I know the anticipation is killing you. There it is. Everyone take 5 seconds and say, what does that bird remind you of? Where have I seen iconography like that before?
Oh, yeah.
Jason, I don't think we can pump up similar images. I don't think Facebook and social media would like that very much. But if you go to
Todd had a great tweet about it, though, showing some different. Where can people follow your Twitter account, Todd?
So it's TAMTRIB, letter T, letter A, letter M, TRIB. That's going to be at Twitter there. We can go into a lot more detail on Twitter where free speech is still allowed. And folks, if you want to follow our Substack, we're going to get a much more detailed account of this entire flag and emblem debacle next week. I got a little sick this week. I created a great draft, and then all of a sudden, kid goes down, I go down. So life happened a little bit. So it's going to be a little out of the news cycle, but next week you can check out the full detailed history of the flag and the emblem here, and we can show some other pictures that might jog your memory. But Jason, what do you see on this bird here?
I gotta say, I see Nazi birds, man.
I do too, Jason. I do too. Those wings are pretty sharp and crisp.
Yeah, I was gonna say, for anybody that studied World War II in Germany, go. It was funny because I'm like, why on earth do we have a Nazi loon? Like, I didn't know you could make a Nazi loon, and turns out state of Minnesota, trying not to be racist, comes up with a Nazi loon. It's insane.
All right, but Jason, here's the other issue. Do you recall? Let's just hammer this point home too a little bit. Do you recall the problem in this emblem?
Yes, the Native American.
Do you recall the problem in Land O'Lakes butter logo?
Native American.
How did they solve that problem?
They got rid of the Native American.
Okay, folks, everyone was clamoring. And look, if you go to the Substack next week, AmericanTribune.news, I'm pulling quotes from a lot of these advocates. And Jason, up next is the who's who behind this process here. And local Minnesotans will identify some maybe other changes that they've made, we'll say. But they all said, we want to find something that represents us more. We want to feel included in the process here. I'm wondering, Jason, if you're an American Indian in Minnesota, and you're Dakota, you're Ojibwe, and you've been advocating for 50 years since the 1960s AIM movement, are you feeling seen and heard in this new emblem?
I gotta say, the way the left attacks racism to me is just funny. The having the picture of the Native American is racist, so you get rid of the Native American. The way to solve racism against African Americans is to create exclusive African American groups. I was just reading an article today where I was talking about I forget the state, I think it was Oregon. They removed math and reading credentials as a qualification of graduation in order to help diverse students. So they're saying diverse students aren't going to be smart enough to learn how to read and write at grade level. So that's no longer a requirement to graduate, is actually being able to read and write. And somehow that's not racist.
Yeah.
So we're going to let people graduate that can't meet minimum standards of reading and writing. We're going to give them a thing because, I mean, if I were one of the people that was directed that, I'm going to be like, you think I'm so stupid I can't learn to read and write at grade level? It's the racism of low expectations. So, but who are the people behind all this nonsense?
I know you keep asking that question. We keep finding one more thing. I'm learning this in real time, folks, here. So you were right here with us. Jason, take a look at these two logos side by side. Do you notice anything different?
All the dots.
Well, and take a look at
and
the phrase
the
in the middle.
name.
So this is fascinating. So the rough draft of the Substack this week, folks, had Minnesota Makoche, which is an American phrase for, I believe, land of sky blue waters. I don't have the exact translation memorized necessarily. That got a lot of flack, though, because under Minnesota law, you're not allowed to have anything that's, I believe, I want to say not Indian necessarily, but I believe not like necessarily a Native American language, because the old emblem had L'Etoile du Nord, which is the North Star state, basically. So that's French. They're allowed to have French on the emblem. I'm not quite up to speed on what the law was necessarily, but I know that this violated the Dakota phraseology right there, did violate some existing law here. And it almost looks like if this is the updated emblem that I just pulled, it looks like they might have changed the little slogan on there too last minute.
Right.
Caving once again, either maybe, quote unquote, following the law, but also caving to some pressure again.
And it's just so funny. It just shows how ineffective government is. Let's take something that's perfectly fine. Let's take the let's take the state seal and state flag, and then let's spend a bunch of time and resources changing it 100 different ways to try to appease somebody. And maybe I'm wrong. I mean, I mentioned I have Native American blood. That's my highest percent. But if you're a purebred Native American, do you feel the native on the horse waving at the white farmer was racist? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm insensitive. But I got to think, if I'm a Native American and the solution is that, or they remove me from the flag, I don't know how the Native American, to be honest, I don't think any Native
Jason,
American
do you identify with the white farmer in that flag?
No. Like, it's just, I've not been a farmer. I've worked on a farm.
I've never even, I see them there. I mean, if I had to choose, if you put a gun to my head, I might say, yeah, I guess I feel more like the farmer in that picture, but I've never associated really with any of this. I look at this picture and I say, that's a history of Minnesota almost 200 years ago, well before I was born or around, and like that people used to farm, and there used to be, that used to be a thing. That picture there, that was history. So
but let's talk about the people that are destroying.
Let's do it, because this is fascinating here. I spent way too much time. If you want to support our work here, AmericanTribune.news is our Substack. You can be a paid monthly subscriber or an annual subscriber. If you like this podcast, we've done way too much on local Minnesota history. I promise we're going to get to national events, but you can like, share, subscribe to the show here. But I did a little too much digging into this emblem commission. So, Jason, we have some background on every single person involved. And spoiler, they're all woke Democrats. So if you thought this outcome was going to be any different, I'm sorry to tell you that that's not the case. First up, though, we have one of the state senators. Her name is Mary Kunesh. Kunesh, I will say Kunesh. She identifies as Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Her grandfather and mother were enrolled citizens. I think it's always interesting. She says she identifies, even though she's maybe not technically. That's neither here nor there, but this is what really bothers me. Not that she has Native American background, blood, what have you. What bothers me most, I'm going to read from her Wikipedia profile. She graduated from Cathedral High School in St. Cloud, Minnesota, which is private. She attended St. Catherine University, which is private. She graduated with a Bachelor of Arts in Elementary Education, and then later got a Master's of Arts in Information before running for state senate. She was a library media specialist, which more power to you. I think if you want to work with kids and get them introduced to books, maybe in the 1990s, I don't know about books that you're exposing kids to nowadays, but back in the day, you want to work with kids in the library, that's fine. I don't know, Jason, here, number one, private education, you don't get to turn around and say you're oppressed. And that's exactly what she's doing here. She says, I'm an oppressed American Indian in Minnesota, so I need this legislation to remove this oppressive looking Indian in this flag and change everything about our history and culture. You just don't get to play that card with your private education upbringing. Do you know how limited that exposure is to most kids in Minnesota? Like, you are already in the elite top tier. So stop with the fake tears. Stop with the fake outrage. So she, and again, you're a library media specialist. I don't want to hate on anybody, but look, that you're a library media specialist. You don't all of a sudden have this power to change everything about the state because of that background. But she introduces the legislation. Jason, you want to add on to that before we keep going?
No, I was just going to say it. It's always funny that the oppressed people, no matter what race, are always the elites. And we talk a lot about that on the podcast, where it's not right versus left, black versus white. It's the working class versus the elites. And if you stratify that across everything else, I have more in common. I grew up in a trailer park down in southwestern Minnesota. And when I moved to the Twin Cities, I moved into a poor African American neighborhood. I had more in common with those poor black folk than I had in common with the elite white folk, regardless of race. And they keep stratifying people based on their socioeconomic status. So here's some privileged person going to private school who comes out and says, you know what's really racist? The Native American on the flag. Are you freaking kidding me?
Well, I'm so glad you said that, Jason. So here is the House representative. So this Mary Kunesh character, she's in the state Senate. So here's our now state House rep that co-signs the legislation. His name is, I'm going to butcher it, I don't care. Mike Freeberg will say. Get a load of his background here. He goes to Georgetown University, where he got a Bachelor of Arts in Government and Russian, of all things. And then he gets a Juris Doctor from William Mitchell College of Law. He's a Democrat. Does he sound like he resonates with the working class folks, the DFL party in Minnesota? No, he doesn't.
Yeah, I was going to say it's crazy. Growing up in Minnesota, DFL, for the longest time, Democratic Farm Labor, it was the farmers, it was the plumbers, it was kind of the normal working class folks. And we all kind of hated the Republicans because they just did things for the benefit of big business that screwed over small companies and that kind of thing. That's kind of some of the history of the DFL party in Minnesota. And then at some point, these crazy elite liberals came in and took over the party and just try to squash the working class. It's ridiculous.
Absolutely. And here's the disclaimer, folks. I know we're getting really specific into the weeds about, you don't need to know anything about these people, but what they represent is the cancer right now. So we're naming a state senator and a state rep. Their names are really immaterial because this is happening at your state. This is happening in your community. These people they're totally replaceable. Like, they all think the same. They all want to do the same thing. So use these names as proxies for the larger destruction that the Democrats are playing right now. I just want to add on this too. Again, for some reason, this guy has a huge Wikipedia page, even though he's a state house rep. Freeberg sponsored legislation for Minnesota to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, though, just to kind of get a larger picture of who these fools are. And Jason, we might have to do an extra episode on the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, because that spells the doom of the Electoral College and basically turns the United States into a popular vote machine for president, which would be
right.
Completely nothing about what the founders intended. But there you go. There's the legislative background of the bill here. And Jason, should we get into the committee of who worked on this flag and emblem?
Let's go through the committee.
All right.
And Todd really makes a great point too. Minnesota, California, several states, we're the tip of the spear of the stupidness. And we're going to tie this over here in a few minutes to what's happening nationally. But in Minnesota, they are destroying our heritage. They're destroying our culture. We look to us as your warning sign. And there's millions of Americans that are like Todd and I that are just good, hardworking Americans that just want to raise our family and do right things. But we're losing the battle, folks. We have to get people energized and understanding what's happening. But let's go through the committee. This is just ridiculous.
Let's go really fast. Here's the overview. There are a couple components when legislators made up who's going to design this. Number one, you have the race-based representation. And when I mean race-based, I explicitly mean they are choosing of Hispanic, Black, and Asian background. Jason, I found it interesting. There was no specific Somali cohort as part of this. And then we ended up with Somali flag, incidentally. There's also no white group that gets to decide this. So really fast here, you had Louis Fitch, who was on the Council of Latino Affairs. And I read this, Jason. I might be reading into it too much, but his own biography says that he's fluent in both Spanish and English, and that he has a proven track record of melding Yankee merchandising know-how with Hispanic sensibilities. I've been to Mexico. When they use the word Yankee, they don't mean it nicely. Like, huh, look at that Yankee over there. It's derogatory. So this guy hates white people. And I think that's the theme. They hate white people. And then the white people on this committee, we're going to show they hate themselves too. So that's from the Council of Latino Affairs. And then not to be out left, we have from the Council on Asian Pacific Minnesotans, Kim Jackson. And her claim to fame appears to be writing a compendium of different stories of Korean or Hmong and Korean transplants in Minnesota here. So we have a lot of kids that were adopted from overseas, like everyone else, I imagine. But her whole thing is, and Jason, I make a point in the Substack to note, I don't know what it would be like to be adopted from overseas and grow up in a community that is completely alien to you. Maybe the positive is that you don't know any different because you're brought over as a baby. But look, growing up, no one looks like you. I think there'd be a little bit of cognitive dissonance and struggle with your own identity. And I fully get that. But the theme of the book here just goes woke, in my opinion. Instead of being grateful for being rescued from an orphanage overseas, and God only knows the life you would grow up living, seems to be that, it's about being oppressed. Like, oh, I grew up and I don't know who I am. Woe is me, sort of thing. Like, strike a balance. You can be grateful for what you have. You can be struggling to get your identity. I think that's the human experience. Like, who am I? What am I doing here? Like, fully get on board with that. But I don't know, to turn around and be like, these white people, they adopted me and, white people are bad. I feel like that takes a different sort of tone. But par for the course here, we don't like white people. And then Denise Mazzone was on the Council of Minnesotans of African Heritage. We had to get the Black voice on here. And here is a statement for her. So she is noteworthy because she is the first Black elected president of a realtor association. So I don't know, kudos to you. But her quote in what she wants to do now as the first Black president of this realtor group is, "I believe in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I will be making sure it's a pillar every step of the way, including our staff. I need someone to come behind me, like the young man on our board of directors who's also African-American." Again, I don't know if you can be any more explicitly racist and biased, but can you imagine, Jason, if you and I in our company said we're only going to hire white people because we need our company to represent us as white folks? Like, we would be sued to oblivion. So I don't know how they get away with that.
It's funny. There were two things in that statement. One, how is it not racist to say I'm going to pick somebody based on their race? By definition, that's racist. And anybody making an argument otherwise is just not being honest. The second thing that she said is she used that word equity. And we first started hearing about that word when Joe Biden was going through his inauguration and they were talking about equity. Equity is the single least American concept you can have. Equity and equality are not the same things. Equality says I'm going to give two people the same opportunity, may the best man win. Equity means I am going to level set so everybody has the same outcome.
And I'm going to discriminate to do it.
Right. I'm going to discriminate. I'm going to take whatever steps necessary to make sure that both people finish the race at the same point. Equity never works out when people try doing that historically. One, it disincentivizes people to take risks and work hard, because if you're going to get the same no matter how hard you work, you're not going to work as hard. That's human nature. The second thing is anytime you set up a system like that, the power ends up going to the few, not the many, because they're the ones that control the resources, because they control the allocation of resources. And Todd, I'd be remiss. I gotta address a comment too, because we talk about people of different persuasions. So we had James Parker. James, I think you've commented on our podcast before.
Good to have you back, James. Yeah.
Welcome back. I'm tired of all you sleep Trump blank kissers. I think he means sheep, but we'll give him the typo. Folks, people like James are who we need to wake up. And here's what's interesting. When you do a pro-American stance, when you do this stuff is stupid, why are we wasting energy on this? Why do they get rid of the Native Americans? We have gone 40 minutes into this show and we haven't said the word Trump once. But James knows, James knows that if you're America first, he didn't even call us you stupid Republicans. He called us you MAGA hating folks, even though we are 40 minutes in, and somebody fact check me. I don't think we've mentioned Trump once.
We are going to get to Trump because he has a comment from a video we're going to share. But Jason, we have not mentioned it once. This is irrespective of Donald Trump. He could not even be a person and we would still have this conversation.
I was going to say, and that's where it's funny. Do we transition to the nationwide to the Trump clip?
Now, let's do it here because James, you prompted a comment here. We were going to get to Donald Trump. So you wanted Trump, you got Trump. We'll play it and then we'll talk about it.
No, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down excuse me. Are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him?
I do love
Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay?
I played the end of the clip just for James because I bet he thinks Donald Trump called Nazis good people.
Yeah, I was going to say, we talked about this on several episodes. It always comes up. One of the biggest ways to tell if somebody's been brainwashed is to see if they believe the fine people hoax, which is whereas President Trump, that was a quote back in the Charlottesville, remember, people that were white supremacists with tiki torches and they're protesting. And Donald Trump said there was very fine people on both sides, but I'm not talking about the white nationalists. You just saw the clip. That's already gone in James' ear and out the other. And if you talk to him tomorrow, he will not remember that he saw the clip of Donald Trump condemning white supremacists, even though it was in the same, that was like a 50-second clip. So guys like James are the ones we're hoping to wake up. Thanks for tuning in, James. We welcome you back. We're here every Friday from 11 to 12 Central Standard Time. We'd love to have you back. We'd love to have you comment. And someday you're going to wake up and realize how brainwashed you are, and it's going to startle you. Absolutely. But going into the concept of what President Trump was talking about, back when Charlottesville happened, 2016-17, he was talking about erasing American history. And while we shouldn't be proud of all the parts of American history, there's things that we all condemn. There's things that we wish wouldn't have happened. But understanding and having that connection to America and its history and its founding fathers is really a critical thing, I think, for people to understand. And when you unattach people from that rich history, while not always perfect, it makes it easier to help take over and ruin the country. And Todd, when Donald Trump was saying that, what are you going to pull down Washington, Jefferson, blah, blah, blah? What did people say, oh, no, we're not going to do that? Or did they call him crazy for even thinking it?
Oh, Donald Trump, you're so crazy. Like, we're taking down Robert E. Lee because he's a Confederate, and the Confederacy's bad because they had slaves, and that's as far as we're going to think about that. But we won't go after Washington and Jefferson. That's crazy talk. Like, those are American heroes. But he asked the question, they were slave owners, so he already saw them for what they were. He called their game and bluff immediately. But no, if you go back in time a couple years ago, you can watch the clips of everyone mocking him for that and trying to, again, just one more lie about Trump. They came daily. But no, he was not seen as prescient. He was ridiculed and mocked.
Right. And actually, now if you look, they're starting to remove founding fathers from different memorials. I mean, the next part we kind of want to dive into. Yeah, here you go. Todd, do you want to explain what we're showing here?
All right. This is like a special episode for N Wokeness, but look, when you're on point, you're on point. So quoting Orwell from the book 1984, every book rewritten, every picture repainted, every statue and street building renamed. And so here's Donald Trump right again. So folks, if you haven't been paying attention this last week or so, the Reconciliation Monument in the Arlington National Cemetery was, I'll say, quietly removed. I don't think a lot of people have necessarily heard about this if you're not on Twitter. We're going to get into the history of the cemetery, the statue specifically, and I know we're running out of time almost, but get into the Reconstruction era too. Like, this was not just some insignificant monument and statue that they removed here, and Joe Biden specifically sanctioned it. I think it's important to note that this wasn't the left-wing BLM mob tearing down Columbus's statue. This was Joe Biden's administration saying this has got to go.
Yeah, and Todd, you come from an education background. If you had to explain in a minute or two, give us kind of the highlight of the Civil War.
Well, do you want the textbook version or do you want maybe the unrecorded historical version? But
kind of the unrecorded historical version.
You know, in a nutshell here, you had a conflict between North and South. I don't think anyone needs us to rehash that necessarily, but slavery in the South, free states will say in the North. Although, interestingly, you can point to maybe the lives or well, we won't get into that right now. But as the nation was moving westward, the issue becomes, how do we welcome new states necessarily? Are they slave states? Are they free states? Do they decide for themselves? How do we keep a balance? And so, Jason, we are in this dance for 100 years of how do we bring aboard new states while not necessarily solving the slave issue crisis, which the founders knew from the very beginning. They saw that this was a problem, but setting the record straight here, Washington and Jefferson were slave owners. They hated slavery, but they couldn't unite the country in 1776 if they solved the question then. They said the bigger problem is creating America. Unfortunately, we're not going to solve every problem today. Let future generations solve this. So they created a framework for it to be solved, which it was. If you don't know history, we solved the question of slavery in enough time. But they couldn't address it all at the beginning. So unfortunately, you go back and forth about welcoming new states. You have compromises take place. No one's ever really happy. And so it comes to a head with the Civil War. After the Civil War, the question then becomes, what do you do with millions of freedmen in the South? You're not going to change minds overnight. I think people forget this too. Like yesterday, you were a slave owner, and today your slaves are equally free under the law in your backyard, basically. This is not just a problem that gets solved when you end the Civil War. You still have minds and attitudes to change. And folks, I got news for you. If you were a racist on April, 13th, 1865, a week later on April 20th, you might still hold those same viewpoints, even though the situation has changed dramatically in the South. So these are people, products of their time. They had certain viewpoints, and maybe not even all of them, but the woke left's going to paint a brush with a broad picture. And so now what do you do in the post-Civil War era? And that's what we call a reconstruction for the most part. How do we welcome the South back into the fold? Former enemies, treasonous, seditious, you decide the language you want to use. Personally, Jason, the older I get, the more I read, the more sympathetic I am to the South in a lot of ways, because these were a group of states that didn't like the federal tyranny necessarily. And I know I'm going to turn a lot of viewers off right now. If you want to go back and take an alternative look at Lincoln, though, necessarily, not Mr. Constitution, suspending habeas corpus, invading the South with troops. Now, you could argue that maintaining the unity of the entire American states was a good thing. I'm not opposed. It'd be interesting to see what that would have played out as. But the South said, no, states' rights are supreme. And I happen to be a big states' rights guy. So it's not a one-sided view here. But what do you do now after the Civil War and Reconstruction to bring states back on board? And that's the question of Reconstruction. And so I'm going to fast forward, Jason, because you wanted a minute. I think I gave us 3. This statue was built in the end of the 19th century, the end of the late 1800s, when President McKinley decided enough is enough. We are one nation again. Bygones be bygones, basically. And if you want to go into kind of, other motives, this was right at the start of the Spanish American War. So he needed everybody because he needed soldiers again to go down into Cuba and Philippines and the rest of that nonsense. But he creates the monument. He says we are one country again. He moves it forward. And so take that as what you will with a lot of different pieces of history. But this monument symbolizes the reunification of America, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, and actually, Todd touched on some great points. Great recap on that. And I mean, just for the record, like Todd and I both anti-slavery, slavery bad. So don't try to clip something we said.
I didn't say that.
Pre-Civil War, understand what the nation was like. You first identified as a state, like you would identify as a Virginian before you would identify as an American. And Virginia would have different norms, social standings than Pennsylvania would. And that was okay. You could have one set of standards in Pennsylvania, one set of standards in Virginia, and it was okay. And then you as a citizen would say, do I more align with Virginia or do I more align with Pennsylvania? That was how they got all the states to come together when they created the United States. They said, we're going to keep this limited government. They're going to give us a lot of freedoms to decide our own rules. So like in Minnesota, liquor stores were closed on Sundays. Liquor stores were open right across the border in Wisconsin on Sundays. It was okay that they had different laws. And there were some things like slavery that transcended, that you reached a point in the country where they said, this should really be something that we all agree on. And that was kind of some of the points that caused the Civil War, was more that states' rights versus federal government rights. And we've lost that. After the Civil War, though, Todd, how many nations survive a civil war like we went through?
I'm going to say 0.
Yeah, if you look historically, when you have a division like we did in the Civil War between North and South, virtually across history, you've never had You've never had people come together.
Or
And
Jason, how many have ended in just 4 years? Like, not only survived a civil war, but really bookended it in such little time and moved on too. Like, look at Sudan. They're still in a civil war after how many decades?
yeah, I mean, most civil wars end up going for 20, 30, 50 years. They're never truly settled. And our leaders at the time of the Civil War, between Lincoln and some of the other folks, like, they were pretty visionary. They said, okay, you guys in the South, we need to welcome you back in the family. Like, let's get back together. Let's keep the United States united. So they made all these concessions. They sat down at the negotiating table, and the South wanted to protect their heritage, and they wanted to protect the things they fought for, the leaders that they supported, and not like, hey, this guy fought for slavery, hey, this guy fought for states' rights, this guy represented us. And the North saw the wisdom in, because if the North would have said, you know what, we're not gonna let you, we're gonna destroy your history, the South would not have rejoined the Union. And so now, a couple hundred years later, for us to tear these statues down, honestly, the leaders back in the South at the time, had they known this is the path you were going, they would have not reconciled with the United States.
And Jason, not to get metaphorical with you for a second, they literally tore the statue down, but I would argue this has been a long time coming. So if you go to Arlington National Cemetery's website, you can get a pretty detailed description of what this means. And some of this information I pulled out already in my overview. But the one thing that I couldn't ignore it was the fact that how often they talked about contested legacies, cultures, white Americans, segregation. The thing that Arlington National Cemetery makes clear is that this statue didn't represent everybody. It represented the reunification of, in their words, white Americans. And so this is why what is taught to kids in schools is so important, because for years now, they've slowly been planting these seeds that the unification didn't occur for all Americans. We hear that a lot. Not everyone is affected. And yeah, absolutely true. But you were a slave one day and you were free the next day. Look, things take time. Changing ideas.
Yeah, how
does
that work?
So I don't know how you legislate different ideas, but we are making progress. And again, the founders laid the foundation to make that change and improve. But the statue coming down was just the final nail in the coffin, so to speak, because the idea of what that statue represented, that was torn down a long time ago. Academics made sure to just portray that statue as purely just for white people. And to their point here, Arlington National Cemetery opened up its doors to, and maybe Jason, we need to touch on this. That statue was erected after they reinterred Confederate soldiers in Arlington. So for a long time, it was only open to Union soldiers because it was a Union cemetery, even though Robert E. Lee's land is how they created it. So you have this kind of weird connection. But decades later, I believe again it was McKinley said, no, the Confederates were Americans. They can be buried here as well. So they interred Confederate soldiers, dug them up, placed them there again. But it was only for white soldiers. And again, history takes time to develop here. So later on that changed as well. But there was a segregation of sorts in the cemetery for the bodies of the dead soldiers, white and black. And so again, not denying that history takes place, but then to frame it up this way of what this statue means, a little disingenuous. And again, it kind of precedes the eventual tearing down if you can convince enough people that this statue is bad in the first place.
And it brings up an interesting point too, Todd, not to go into too much of an aside, but if you look at history, I mentioned I have Native American roots. Native Americans had slaves. When you conquered another tribe, you took them as slaves.
Those were the lucky ones.
Those were the lucky ones, the ones that were still alive. Europe had slaves. Africa had slaves.
They still have slaves.
They still have slaves. Central America had slaves. Hispanic countries, Aztecs, they had slaves. I'm unaware of, I mean, you can go back to the Greeks and Romans. Guess what they had? Slaves. So, Genghis Khan and the Mongols, they had slaves.
Jason, I got to ask, are you justifying slavery right now?
Yeah, it's funny because that's what you get accused of. But my point is, I'm yet to find a society in history that at some point hasn't had slaves. So to condemn white people for slavery is the most disingenuous argument you could ever make, because as sad as it is, and if you want to teach history and the 17 1719 or 1619 projects. They try to act like white people were the only people that had slaves, and I'm here to tell you, folks, that is not true.
Although,
So,
Jason, if you want to segregate by race, you could say that white people were the first to end slavery. Slavery was abolished in Britain, the United States, and actually the British Navy stopped the slave trade along the African coast. So, hate to break it to everybody, but white folk actually ended slavery and spread that mission around the world. Take that as what you will. But Jason, too, white people were enslaved in Africa. I think that's important to comment on as well. So if we want reparations, I'm waiting for mine too.
Right. Yeah, and actually David Elliott in the comment had a great point too about Civil War. Technically it wasn't a civil war, it was a war between the states. And I think that's one of the important points to understand. There was a time in America where we understood that the federal government was not all powerful. In fact, all the majority of the founders of the country wanted the federal government to have very little power over your daily life. They wanted it to be completely acceptable that states in the Union were fighting or got to have their own sovereignty. You know, a lot of states even had their own currencies and different social structures.
Yeah.
So,
And I wonder if David's from the North, because if you're from the South, you don't call it the Civil War at all. You call it the War of Northern Aggression.
that's right.
There's your perspective right there.
So, but how do they move us past this history? You know, we started with the Minnesota emblem and they're trying to remove that. They're trying to change it. They're taking down these Confederate memorials and they're rewriting history in real time, folks. And Todd, why is that so dangerous?
Well, yeah, if we want to quote Orwell, is this Orwell? He who controls the past controls the future. That might be Animal Farm right there instead of 1984. But folks, if you lose your ties with your history, your culture, your identity, that really opens you up to being anybody. Because now if you don't have a history or an identity, guess who's going to make one for you? And they're going to say, no, Minnesota. Here, let's pull up the emblem again one more time. That's you, Minnesotans. Look at that evil white man displacing the Indian on his land here. So we're not only going to get rid of that entirely and make it the Third Reich bird, but now we're just going to remind you that you're an awful human being too. So you get no connection to the history of just this is what happened without emotion or judgment. But nope, now you are a bad person. And now we're going to erase any memory so you can't verify that one way or the other too.
Yeah, it's remarkable. And that's why it's important that we stop letting this happen. And some of this stuff's happening right in front of us. And it's funny though, Todd, I guess to get to a little current news, we did find the one part of the Civil War the Democrats like, though. Do you know what that was?
Can't wait to hear your take on this.
The 14th Amendment.
Oh, how about that? That's weird. Legislation that was written over 150 years ago that essentially freed slaves, guaranteed black men the right to vote. If you're born here, you're a citizen. They wouldn't do anything with that, would they?
Yeah, no, clearly not. Clearly not. So this week in breaking news, the Colorado Supreme Court determined that they couldn't, that according to the 14th Amendment, he cannot be, he's not eligible to be president. Todd, do you want to explain where the 14th Amendment came from?
Well, let's use Vivek Ramaswamy's words. And I wish we had more time because after Reconstruction, it's really fascinating to talk about the 1876 election that essentially ended Reconstruction. And boy, you want to talk about contested elections here. But again, erase history. The Donald Trump stuff is the most important election ever take place. But we've had these disagreements for a long time, and the country's always maintained. But I don't think the left wants to do that anymore. But here's what Vivek tweeted after the case in Colorado where these four awful judges who should be disbarred for what it's worth because they're not following any written law. They're just going off on what the media has told them and convinced them of. The 14th Amendment was part of the Reconstruction Amendments, so 13, 14, and 15, that were ratified following the Civil War, passed to prohibit former Confederate military and political leaders from holding high federal or state office. Okay, so someone like Jefferson Davis, let's say, the president of the Confederacy, you can't come back in and go to Washington, D.C. as a representative. These men had clearly taken part in a rebellion against the United States. That makes it all the more absurd that a left-wing group in Colorado is asking a federal court to disqualify the 45th president on the same grounds, equating his speech to rebellion against the United States. Let me decipher that for you. So take Jefferson Davis, who leads a war, an act of rebellion, the actual rebellion against the United States. all right, you can't hold office anymore. You led a rebellion. They are saying Donald Trump's rebellion on equal grounds as leading soldiers into the North or fighting soldiers on the South is the same thing as saying you need to fight like hell and protest peacefully in the Capitol and let your voices be heard. They are saying that is the exact same thing.
I gotta say, it's remarkable how all these Trump charges or charges against people on the right are this twisted legal thing. No scholar of the Constitution who understands the Reconstruction and understands the amendments to the Constitution, they all understood what it meant. Like, if you led an armed rebellion against the United States, not if you led some protest or whatever, but this is the brainwashing that we've gotten to. Like the guys earlier who was talking about, oh, you Trump people, he really thinks January 6th was an insurrection. He is so weak. He's been so poisoned by the mainstream media that he doesn't even understand what an insurrection is. He thinks that if those people would have just made it into the Congress chamber, they would have overthrown the government and Trump would have been president.
We were so close, Jason.
Yeah. It's like he thinks it was a game of steal the flag and like, oh, we got the gavel. We got the House gavel. Donald Trump is now president.
Taking a different war for a second, Jason, do you remember when the Capitol Police led the British around the White House and Capitol building in 1812?
Yeah.
I remember that. That was so peaceful, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's insane.
Right before they burned it down.
But anyway, so tying it back to President Trump, so what they're trying to do is take, and it's the same that's happened with all his charges, with the charges we covered last week, how they're trying to go after him and the January 6ers under an Enron financial case law. So in this, they're taking the Confederacy, that millions of people died and there was war for 4 years. And they didn't even like kick him out of office because there were still provisions where you could still hold a higher office. But they're trying to apply that to President Trump. And if you talk about what's going to lead to a real civil war, what's going to lead us back to where we fragment, it's stuff like this that's going to get us there.
Absolutely. I'm going to read one more because I think this is also important. So if that wasn't clear enough that this is an absurd interpretation of the 14th Amendment, there's another legal problem, Vivek writes. Trump is not a former, quote, officer of the United States, as that term is used in the Constitution. Again, words matter. Meaning Section 3 doesn't even apply at all. As the Supreme Court explained in a previous ruling, an officer of the United States is someone appointed by the president to aid him in his duties. The term does not apply to elected officials and certainly not to the president himself. Like I said, they should be disbarred. This is such an awful ruling. It is purely politically motivated. And it kind of reminds me of this. Well, take it away, Jason. I don't know if you want to add to the legal interpretation here first.
Well, I was going to say it's just a continuation of what we've seen for the past couple of years. And the apologists on the left who support this, they are taking, and we explained last week, the Enron statute that they're applying to the January 6th folks could be applied to any citizen who at all disrupts any government thing. So technically speaking, if you went into a building to protest like the Kavanaugh folks, they could have all been thrown in jail. This interpretation means that without presenting evidence, that a state Supreme Court can say you can't run for president. And what's remarkable about this amendment too is they even left it open to the will of the people, where they left open the door. If you were from the South and you were one of these folks that led an insurrection, that you could be elected by your peers. It's just you couldn't appoint people that participated in insurrection. The whole thing is remarkable.
Indeed. Indeed it is. And one of the rulings too, Julie Kelly is a great follow on Twitter for especially these J6 and Trump cases, but the Colorado judges cited Eric Swalwell's testimony specifically that says Trump was an insurrectionist. So the guy that slept allegedly with a Chinese spy and is a Democrat and hates Trump and said that he was an insurrectionist was cited as compelling evidence in favor of this ruling. So Eric Swalwell, elected Democrat, somehow has more sway than even Trump himself and his circle that testified against this. that would certainly know a little bit better. But Swalwell knows because he goes on the media.
Yeah, it's truly remarkable. And as they continue to unmoor us, our children, our future generations from history, they reframe what history was, and then they twist everything to construct this alternate reality that we all find ourselves living in. And the media is culpable in that, and that's why we do things like the Freedom from the Press podcast. We want to cut through that narrative. We hope that we educate and inform you, and you leave the show and you go, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. And we joke one of our most popular episodes was the ethanol subsidy thing, and we showed what a scam that was. And it's not that we're Trump supporters. It's not that we're conservatives. It's that we think government's corrupt, and we think everybody should know that. And we hope that everybody can agree on that, because that's how normal people like Todd and I and folks watching this show are going to help take back this country and save us from these oligarchs that are destroying it. So with that, Todd, anything else or final thoughts for the week?
You know, the question that I would like to pose to James and all the other listeners, and if you disagree with us, we love that you're here, love that you're listening, love that you're engaging in the comments. But my question for all of you is, are you okay with what's happening? Do you value freedom? Do you value the will of the people? And do you value truth? Because right now, as it stands, Jason, and correct me if I'm wrong a year from now as more information comes out, but it certainly seems like this is a very one-sided partisan effort. And I feel very confident that the facts are on our side here. But if you value truth, value fairness, value the will of the people and freedom, I need an explanation for why this is okay. And come back next week and let us know in the comment section kind of your answer to that question.
Yeah, I was going to say kind of as an aside there, I was having a fascinating discussion with somebody on Twitter, and we were talking about in Minnesota now, taxpayers pay for school lunches. I'm opposed. I think as a parent, pay for your own damn school lunches for your kids. And it was funny because they asked me a question. They said, why is that? Because Republicans are bad or MAGA is bad and they want kids to starve. And my simple answer was, the fact is, I don't want to make the government responsible for basic life functions. Because if we as citizens transfer over something as simple as feeding our kids to the responsibility of the government instead of ourselves, we lose part of ourselves as a citizen. And some of these folks, that's really, I think, but it was funny. It hit me when that comment came back and they didn't have anything to say. They're like, oh, you MAGA people are crazy. I'm like, well, refute my point. Like, how is it good to have government in charge of executing basic things? But some folks, they're like that. They're like, govern me harder, daddy. I can't take care of myself. I need you to take care of me. And the concept of going out and being responsible for yourself terrifies them. So I think that's part of why they cling to that, is they're scared. They know they can't take care of themselves. They know they didn't develop skills. They know they couldn't go build a cabin or run electrical wire or whatever.
Start
and they're counting. Yeah, they're counting on government to be there to take care of them.
And I would add, Jason, too, it's pretty scary to wake up one day and kind of reflect and say everything I've believed and thought and was taught is wrong. I mean, I get it. Like you and I went on my own journey here the past couple of years over the pandemic. I've reevaluated a lot of different positions I held regarding medicine, doctors, let's say. But it's jarring because you certainly go through a process of like, am I okay? I was wrong. I'm mad at myself for not knowing before. What can I learn more about it now? But it doesn't happen overnight. Can be a little scary and jarring to go through that.
And we did have James chiming in. James, thanks again for watching, man. I appreciate it. For those who can't see, you must be talking about yourself, you effing Nazi, low left maggot, F you. James, I'm going to pray for you. I understand that you don't think you can take care of yourself, but you can. I understand that you think the government has to take care of you. I understand that by calling somebody a name like Nazi, you don't have to actually think for yourself. But you keep watching, James. We're going to help teach you to think for yourself. We're going to help teach you what's really going on, how to be self-sufficient. And someday you're going to thank us for it, brother. So, for anybody in the comments, let's all pray for James.
And I don't say this in a patronizing or condescending way. We do the show for people like James because, James, I know I know deep down we can get you there, buddy. Like, we're all on a different path. I think my goal now is to convert James. And if you're open to it, James, come along with us here. We will not mock you, ridicule you, ask questions. Keep typing in the comments. Like, we want to save America, and it starts by saving one person at a time.
Absolutely.
The
And
other
folks-
thing, Jason, I gotta
go ahead.
add this here. We didn't go tinfoil enough, so I gotta say this as far as the school lunches goes, Jason. If the government decides who gets a school lunch, and the government is in control of technology, your monthly income, let's say if we go UBI or they give you that welfare check. Now, if I'm obligated to say and do certain things, if I want to get my food stamps or my welfare or my reduced housing, I might have to make some sacrifices. And if I don't do the right thing, I might lose my kids' lunch money. Jason, you see a problem with that?
I was going to say we could give the listeners a homework assignment for next week. So look back at history, James. You can start the show with it next week. Look back at history and say, when citizens abdicated all of their power and responsibility to a centralized government, when in history has that turned out well for the citizens?
Maybe they haven't done it right, Jason. Maybe this is the first time it'll work.
This time it's gonna work.
They're doing
This
it
time
better.
it's gonna work. And on that note, so folks, that's your homework assignment for next week. Well, first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. Like, comment, share. You can support our work at the AmericanTribune.news. That's where we do some of our deep dives. AmericanTribune.com for some of our funner, lighter weight stuff. Todd's posting recipes on there now. It's kind of fun.
We do everything, folks.
But like we say, as always, make sure you like, comment, and share the show, and especially share the show with people you might not politically agree with, because there's millions of James out there, and the more we can help educate them, the more we can help them understand what's happening, and the outcome isn't good for us as citizens, the more we have a chance to save this country. But God bless you guys, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Say it loud and proud. Have a great holiday season with your family. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. We'll catch you before New Year's here, Jason. I think we'll sneak one in, but thanks for joining us today. Thanks for the engagement in the comments, and we'll see you next week.